The signal that changed everything. The distress signal came from deep space. A faint, desperate cry from a dying world. The Valerie homeworld, a peaceful, unarmed planet, was under attack. The enemy? The Zarkari Empire. A ruthless, war-hardened species that had spent centuries conquering weaker civilizations. The Valerie had no warships, no planetary defenses, no hope. They had sent messages to the Galactic Council, begging for aid. The response? Silence. The Council's official stance was simple. We do not interfere in conflicts. And so, the Valerie sent one last message. A signal cast into the void with no target in mind. Just a simple, desperate call. Is anyone out there? For hours, there was nothing. Then, the universe answered. The unexpected response. The distress call should have been ignored. The Valerie were a non-strategic world. They had nothing of value. They weren't part of any major alliances. In short, they were expendable. But they didn't know who would be listening. Because on the far edge of the galaxy, the signal reached Earth. And Earth doesn't ignore distress calls. Within minutes, the human military was analyzing the message. Within an hour, the Deathworlder fleet was mobilizing. Not diplomats, not politicians, warriors. And by the time the Zarkari realized their mistake, the Deathworlders were already on their way. The difference between humans and the Galactic Council. The Galactic Council had always feared humanity. Not because of our technology, not because of our weapons, not because of our numbers, but because of our nature. Unlike the other species in the galaxy, humans didn't avoid conflict. We didn't walk away when things got difficult. We didn't let the weak suffer. And most of all, we didn't let monsters like the Zarkari exist. So when Earth received the signal, we didn't debate. We didn't hesitate. We simply said, deploy the fleet. Because the moment that distress signal reached human ears, the war was already over. The storm was coming. The Valerie still believed they were alone. As their cities burned, as their people screamed for mercy, as the Zarkari warlords laughed at their suffering, they thought no one was coming. But in the blackness of space, unseen by all, the Deathworlder fleet arrived. And the Zarkari? They had no idea what was about to hit them. The doomed civilization. The Valerie were a species of thinkers, not warriors. A civilization built on knowledge, art, and diplomacy. For centuries, they had lived in peace. Their cities were open, unfortified. Their people had never held a weapon, because they believed in the promise of the Galactic Council. The Council had promised protection, stability, and peace. But now, as Zarkari warships filled their skies, the Valerie realized the truth. The Council's words were empty, and no one was coming to save them. The attack begins. The Zarkari Empire had never been known for mercy. They were conquerors, raiders, destroyers of worlds. And to them, the Valerie were nothing more than easy prey. The first wave of the invasion was swift. The Zarkari bombarded major cities from orbit. Entire districts vanished in flames. Millions died before the first soldier even landed. And the Valerie? They had no way to fight back. The plea for help. As their world burned, the Valerie sent messages to every major faction. To the Galactic Council, to the merchant guilds, to the grand imperial dynasties. And every reply was the same. We do not interfere. This is not our war. We cannot risk breaking the balance of power. The Valerie were on their own. Or at least, that's what they thought. Because far away, in the darkest reaches of space, someone was listening. Someone who didn't care about politics. Someone who didn't care about treaties. Someone who only cared about one thing. Justice. And when Earth received the Valerie's final, desperate plea, they didn't hesitate. They didn't negotiate. They mobilized. The Zarkari's mistake. The Zarkari warlords laughed as they monitored the distress calls. No one is coming. The Valerie are weak. Their allies have abandoned them. They had done this countless times before. Another world burned. Another civilization wiped out. Another victory for the Empire. They never considered the possibility that this time would be different. That this time they had gone too far. That this time they had picked the wrong planet to attack. Because when humans hear a distress call, we don't turn away. We don't stand by. We answer. And when we answer, we bring war. the sky begins to change. As the Zarkari fleets rained fire upon the Valeri homeworld, something shifted in the atmosphere. The stars above flickered. The darkness of space rippled. At first, the Zarkari thought it was a system malfunction, some kind of sensor failure. Then, their communications began to cut out. Their long-range scanners went dark, and in the farthest reaches of their monitors, a fleet emerged. Not just any fleet, a fleet of Deathworlders. And the Zarkari finally realized they weren't the hunters anymore. The Deathworlders answer. The Zarkari Empire had no equals, or so they believed. For centuries, they had crushed every world they set their sights on. Their fleet was the largest in the known galaxy. Their armies were unstoppable. Their rule was absolute. They had never lost a war. And that was why, when their long-range sensors picked up an approaching fleet, they didn't panic. They laughed. Because no fleet in existence could match their numbers. No force could challenge the might of the Zarkari war machine. Or so they thought. Because this wasn't just any fleet. This was the Deathworlder fleet. And humans had come to collect a debt. The nature of Deathworlders. The Galactic Council had always feared Earth. Not because of our technology. Not because of our ships. Not because of our numbers. But because of what we were. Deathworlders. A species that had evolved on one of the most hostile planets in the known universe. A species that had survived hurricanes, earthquakes, volcanoes, and extinction-level events. A species that had fought itself for millennia. To the rest of the galaxy, war was a tactic. To humanity, war was history. It was in our blood. It was something we had perfected long before we ever reached the stars. And now, the Zarkari were about to learn what that meant. The fleet arrives. The first sign of human arrival was not an attack, not a transmission, not a demand for surrender. It was silence. The moment the human fleet arrived, the Zarkari systems shut down. Communications failed. Radar blinded. Targeting systems scrambled. It was as if the void itself had turned against them. And then, without warning, the first Zarkari battleship exploded. Not from a missile, not from a beam weapon. It simply ceased to exist. And then another. And another. The Zarkari warlords stopped laughing. Now, they were afraid. Because they weren't just losing ships. They were losing control. And for the first time in their history, they were the ones being hunted. The psychological war begins. Humans don't just fight wars. We break our enemies before the real battle even begins. The Zarkari fleet, once a perfectly coordinated armada, now fell into chaos. Ships collided with each other. Weapons misfired. Commanders shouted over broken transmissions. The Zarkari warlords demanded answers. How is this possible? Who were these humans? Where did they learn to fight like this? They never considered the truth. We had always fought like this. The only difference now, we weren't fighting each other. We were fighting them. The Deathworlder doctrine. The Zarkari had always won through numbers, through overwhelming force, through planetary destruction. But humans don't fight like the rest of the galaxy. We don't stand in neat battle lines. We don't fight for territory. We don't measure victories in planets conquered. We fight to win, no matter the cost, no matter the odds. And when you push us too far, we don't stop until our enemies are gone. The Zarkari had pushed too far, and now there was no way back. The moment the galaxy realized the truth, the Galactic Council watched the battle from a safe distance. For years, they had feared human aggression. They had worried what would happen if humanity ever went to war. And now, they had their answer. The battle had been going for less than an hour. And already, the Zarkari fleet was collapsing. They weren't just losing. They were being dismantled, picked apart with surgical precision. Humanity didn't just come to fight. Humanity came to end this war. The Zarkari's last move. The Zarkari had always been arrogant. They had always believed in their superiority. And now, with their fleet falling apart, they made their final mistake. They targeted the Valeri homeworld. They decided that if they couldn't have the planet, no one would. And so, they prepared their planet cracker weapons. Their final act of defiance. If they couldn't win, they would ensure the Valeri lost too. They never got the chance. Because at that moment, humanity fired first. The attack on Valeri. The Zarkari Empire was cornered. Their once mighty fleet was falling apart. Their warlords were shouting over failing communications. Their weapons were misfiring, their systems failing. They had been unstoppable conquerors for centuries. But now, for the first time, they were losing. And in their desperation, they made their final, unforgivable mistake. They turned their weapons on the Valerie homeworld, the doomed planet. Valerie Prime was a world of scholars, poets, and artists. They had never built warships. They had never raised armies. They had believed in peace. And now, that belief was costing them everything. The Zarkari had no intention of leaving survivors. If they couldn't rule the Valerie, they would erase them. The death of mercy. The warlords issued a final command. Fire the planet crackers, the most powerful weapons in the Zarkari arsenal, designed to shatter continents, to boil oceans, to turn a thriving world into a lifeless rock. And in that moment, the Valerie knew. No negotiations, no escape, no future. Their world was about to die. And then, the Deathworlders moved. The moment the galaxy held its breath, for a fraction of a second, the battlefield went still. The human fleet, silent until now, unleashed hell. Every weapon fired at once. Not on the Valerie, not on the Zarkari ground forces, but on the planet cracker warships. The first Zarkari dreadnought exploded before its weapons could charge. The second was cut in half by an unseen force. The third and fourth vanished in nuclear fire. In less than 5 seconds, the Zarkari's ultimate weapon was gone. And for the first time in history, the Zarkari Empire tasted fear. The battle turns. The Valerie people, watching from the ground, saw hope. The invincible warships that had darkened their skies were gone. The invaders who had marched through their streets were now retreating. Because the monsters of the galaxy had finally met something worse. Us. The Deathworlders were not here to negotiate. They were not here to discuss terms. They were not here to show mercy. They had come for justice. And justice had no patience for tyrants. The Zarkari tried to flee. The remaining Zarkari ships panicked. Their commanders had never seen a battle turn this quickly. They had believed humanity would fear them. Instead, they were watching their fleet burn. They tried to escape. They tried to run back to the Empire. But the humans had already predicted this. They had been waiting for it. And when the Zarkari moved, the Deathworlders were there. The trap that ended an empire. The retreating Zarkari ships rushed toward the edge of the system, hoping to jump into hyperspace, hoping to reach the safety of their empire. But they never got the chance, because the Deathworlders had already blocked every escape route. Hidden warships emerged from the void. Ambush points activated. A perfectly coordinated strike began. Warp lanes collapsed. Escape routes cut off. Their fleet trapped. There was no way out. The hunters had become the hunted. And now, there was only one way this ended. The last message of the Zarkari. The Zarkari High Warlord, once the most feared ruler in the galaxy, sent a final transmission. Not a threat, not a demand, but a question. What are you? The answer came cold and absolute. A single human voice. We are the last mistake you'll ever make. And with that, the human fleet opened fire. The death of an empire. There was no final stand. No heroic last battle. The Zarkari were erased. No survivors. No warlords left. No empire to return to. The war that had started as another conquest had ended with the total destruction of the Zarkari race. The Deathworlders had not come to win a battle. They had come to end a threat. And they had done exactly that. The galaxy watches in silence. The Galactic Council had been watching. They had seen the Zarkari beg for their lives. They had seen humanity refuse. They had seen an empire wiped from history. And for the first time in history, they understood. Earth was not their enemy. Earth was not their ally. Earth was their final warning. Because if another empire tried what the Zarkari had tried, they now knew exactly how it would end. The wrath of the Deathworlders. The Zarkari Empire was over. But the war was not finished. Not yet. Because humanity does not forgive. And we do not leave unfinished business. The Zarkari had attacked a peaceful world. They had slaughtered millions. And now it was our turn. The Deathworlder fleet had arrived. And there was only one thing left to do. Eliminate the enemy. Completely. No negotiations. No surrender. The Zarkari warlords, once so proud, so arrogant, begged for terms. They offered a ceasefire. They offered a retreat. They offered anything. Humanity did not respond, because there was nothing left to discuss. The time for talking was over. The time for consequences had begun. The Zarkari's last hope, crushed. In a final act of desperation, the Zarkari High Warlord attempted one last move. He broadcast a message to the Galactic Council, a plea for intervention, for diplomacy, for someone, anyone, to stop the humans. The Galactic Council refused. They had watched what had happened. They had seen what humanity was capable of. And for the first time in history, the Council was afraid. So they did nothing. And the Deathworlders moved in for the kill. The system-wide eradication. The Zarkari fleet was trapped. There was nowhere to run. The Deathworlders attacked from all sides. Every human warship fired at once. Massive Zarkari battleships were cut apart. Their elite war cruisers were obliterated. Their last remaining dreadnought was turned into floating debris. They had come to conquer a peaceful world. And now, their entire armada was burning in the void. The ground invasion, a different kind of war. The space battle was over. But there were still Zarkari soldiers on Valerie Prime. Thousands of them. They had enslaved cities. They had massacred civilians. They had thought themselves invincible. Now, they were trapped. The Deathworlders did not bomb them from orbit. No, that would have been mercy. Instead, humanity did something far worse. We landed. The Deathworlders walked the battlefield. The Valerie had been helpless. But humans? We were something else. Armored dropships descended from the sky. Mechanized infantry stormed the streets. Elite squads hunted down every last Zarkari soldier. There were no mass executions, no blind destruction. Instead, humanity did what we do best. We hunted. The Zarkari invaders had shown no mercy. Now, they were seeing what it felt like to be prey. And by the end of the day, none of them were left. The fear spreads across the galaxy. News of the Zarkari's destruction spread like wildfire. The Galactic Council, once so hesitant to act, watched in silence. Other empires, who had once considered Earth a minor player, now saw the truth. Humanity had not just won. We had made a statement, a warning to every tyrant, every warmonger, every empire that preyed on the weak. This is what happens when you provoke Deathworlders. This is what happens when you ignore distress call. And now, the galaxy would never forget. The message left behind. When the battle was over, humanity did not stay. We did not conquer the Valerie. We did not take their planet. We had not come for territory. We had not come for resources. We had come for justice. And before the Deathworlder fleet left, we left behind a single message. One that will be transmitted across the stars. To every empire, to every fleet, to every warlord who thought they could rule through fear. The message was simple. The weak are not alone. The helpless are not forgotten. The next time a distress call is sent, we will answer. And if we must fight, then we will finish it. And with that, the Deathworlders left. The war was over, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The turning point. The Zarkari Empire no longer existed. Their fleet? Gone. Their warlords? Dead. Their rule? Erased from history. And yet, the real battle was just beginning. Because the destruction of a Zarkari was more than a war. It was a shift. A moment that reshaped the entire galaxy. The day the Deathworlders answered that distress call, everything changed. The Galactic Council's reaction. The Council had done nothing. They had watched a peaceful world burn. They had ignored the Valerie's pleas for help. And in their silence, they had let the Zarkari believe they could act without consequence. Now, the Zarkari were gone, and the Council knew exactly why. Because the humans had no patience for politics. They had not asked permission. They had not waited for debates. They had not played the game of diplomacy. They had simply acted, and that terrified the Council more than anything else. Because now, the galaxy knew the truth. The new balance of power. For centuries, the strongest empires had ruled unchecked. The Zarkari had been one of many. There were others. Other warlords. Other conquerors. other civilizations that thrived on the suffering of the weak. But now, they were all reevaluating their choices. Because now, they knew there was a force in the galaxy that answered to no one. A force that did not seek power, but would not tolerate oppression. A force that did not conquer, but would burn an empire to the ground if it dared to prey on the defenseless. A force called humanity. And with that knowledge, the entire galaxy changed. The fear that spread like fire. In the days following the destruction of the Zarkari, something strange happened. Wars stopped. Warlords canceled invasions. Pirates abandoned their raids. Because no one wanted to be next. The question spread across every empire, every ruling class, every council chamber. What if the humans decide we are a threat? Because they had seen what happened to the Zarkari, and no one wanted to be erased next. Humanity's silence was the loudest sound. The most terrifying part? Humanity said nothing. They did not demand territory. They did not ask for tribute. They did not enforce their own laws. They simply left. And that unsettled the galaxy more than anything else. Because what kind of species destroys an empire and walks away? What kind of species wins a war and makes no demands? Only a species that fights for something greater. The Valeri speak. The Valeri, once on the brink of extinction, were alive. And for the first time in their history, they had power. Not through war, not through conquest, but through a simple truth. They had been saved by the Deathworlders. And now, they held a voice that the galaxy could not ignore. When the Valeri spoke at the next council gathering, the chamber fell silent. The same species that had once been ignored was now the most respected voice in the room. And they had only one thing to say. We owe our lives to the humans. And so does the rest of the galaxy. The moment humanity became a legend, the story of the distress signal and the Deathworlder's wrath spread. It was whispered in back-alley dealings. It was debated in council chambers. It was studied in military academies. It became a warning, a legend, a truth. Do not attack the weak. Do not assume no one will come. Do not forget what happened to the Zarkari. Because if the humans get involved, you do not get a second chance. A new era of peace for now. The galaxy, for the first time in millennia, knew true peace. Not because of laws, not because of alliances, not because of diplomacy, but because no one dared to risk war. Not anymore. Not when the Deathworlders were watching. The death of an empire. The Zarkari Empire had ruled for centuries. They had expanded through fear, force, and absolute domination. They had burned worlds to ash. They had enslaved entire species. They had crushed anyone who stood in their way. Until they made one mistake. They attacked a helpless species, and their distress call reached the wrong planet. Because when humans answer a distress call, it's not for negotiation. It's for war. The final days of the Zarkari. The destruction of the Zarkari fleet at Valeri Prime was only the beginning. The moment their armada was wiped from existence, the rest of the empire fell into chaos. Zarkari-controlled worlds rebelled overnight. Their supply lines collapsed. Their warlords turned against each other, desperate to avoid humanity's wrath. Within days, an empire that had once been the terror of the stars was gone, not from a long war, not from treaties or political games, but because they had angered the wrong species. And when humans go to war, we finish it. The survivors plea. In the final hours of the Zarkari Empire, a small fleet of survivors attempted to escape. They sent transmissions to the Galactic Council, begging for asylum. They offered wealth, technology, secrets of war, anything to avoid the wrath of humanity. But the Council's response was clear. You brought this on yourselves. There is no refuge. For centuries, the Zarkari had ignored the cries of their victims. And now, no one would answer theirs. The last warlord stand alone. The final ruler of the Zarkari Empire, High Warlord Thrall, stood on the bridge of his last remaining warship. His empire was burning. His fleet was gone. His armies were dead. And then his sensors detected something closing in. A single human warship, not a fleet, not a battle group, just one ship, because that was all that was needed. Humanity did not leave unfinished business. The last conversation. A transmission came through. A human voice. Calm. Cold. Absolute. High Warlord Thrall, the voice said. There will be no negotiations. There will be no surrender. There will be no mercy. The Zarkari had shown none, and humanity had not forgotten. Thrall's voice shook. This is genocide, he hissed. This is madness. The human voice responded with one final sentence. No, this is justice. And with that, the last Zarkari warship was erased from existence. The galaxy watches in silence. The destruction of the Zarkari Empire was felt across the stars. The Galactic Council, once afraid of human aggression, now realized the truth. Humans did not conquer. Humans did not seek power. Humans did not rule. But if you threatened the innocent, if you preyed on the helpless, if you thought yourself untouchable, you would not survive the Deathworlder's wrath. The new galactic order. With the fall of the Zarkari, a new reality set in. The Valerii, once a species on the edge of extinction, now held a seat at the council. The former allies of the Zarkari scrambled to distance themselves from their crimes. And every empire looked toward Earth with new eyes. Because humanity had done something no species had ever dared. They had not just defeated a galactic power. They had erased it. And in doing so, they had changed the course of history itself. The whisper that echoed across the stars. For years, the galaxy was silent. There were no wars. There were no conquests. There were no massacres. Not because of peace treaties. Not because of alliances. But because every species feared the same thing. What if the humans decide we are next? Because they now knew the terrible truth. Humans did not start wars, but they ended them. And if you crossed them, you would not get a second chance. The final warning. The Zarkari Empire no longer existed. Its fleet was gone. Its warlords were dead. Its people were scattered, leaderless, forgotten. Their homeworld was silent. And in the great archives of the Galactic Council, where the history of every empire was recorded, there was nothing left to write. The Zarkari had been wiped from the stars. Not conquered, not occupied, erased. And now, the galaxy would remember why. The message that shook the stars. The destruction of the Zarkari had been a warning. But humanity was not done. Before leaving, they broadcast a single message. Not just to the Galactic Council. Not just to the former allies of the Zarkari. To everyone. Every empire. Every fleet. Every ruler who had ever considered preying on the weak. The message was clear, direct, undeniable. This is what happens when you attack the helpless. This is what happens when you think no one will come. This is what happens when you believe yourselves untouchable. The next time a distress call is sent, we will answer. And if we must fight, we will finish it. Then, as suddenly as they had arrived, the Deathworlders were gone. No conquest, no occupation, no demands, nothing. Because humans had not come to rule. They had come to correct a mistake. And now that mistake was gone. The fear that would never fade. For the first time in recorded history, the galaxy was truly at peace. Not because of diplomacy, not because of treaties, not because of alliances, but because no one was willing to risk war. Not anymore. Not when they knew what awaited them if they did. The final whisper in the dark. Years passed. The destruction of the Zarkari became legend. Their name was spoken only in whispers. A cautionary tale. A reminder of what happens when you believe yourself unstoppable. And in the dark corners of the galaxy, every time an empire considered expansion, every time a warlord gazed upon a weaker species, every time a council debated intervening or standing by, the same question would be asked. What if Earth finds out? And the answer was always the same. A whisper. A truth written in blood and fire. Then we are already dead. The legacy of the Deathworlders. The humans did not ask for thanks. They did not demand rewards. They did not expect recognition. Because to them, this was never about power. It was never about glory. It was about something far more dangerous. It was about justice. And justice, when delivered by Deathworlders, left nothing behind.